So the title of my talk today is Objective Feet and Leg Joint Structure Between Selection and Second Gestation and Gestation Ages. However, I would like to interject that I will spend part of the time talking to you today about the development of the objective scoring system that I will show to you today. That was a major portion of my master's study. In overview, I'll give you a general introduction of why we feel this work is important, and then an introduction to why this topic is relevant as well. I will also give you some material and methods, specifically how we developed the objective feet scoring system, but then I also want to give you some results and then in the end some conclusions. And like every good research project, it left us with more questions than it did answers. However, I think you'll take away today some things that we saw at the end of this project. And lucky enough for me, I'm continuing into a PhD project where I get the opportunity to try to answer the questions that we came up with as well. So in general, studies have reported that feet and leg problems are the second leading reason for culling among sows, with up to 20.3% of removals due to leg problems. This very well could be an underestimate, as anybody who's worked in the swine industry knows. Culling reasons and codes can often be misconstrued, and likewise feet and leg problems might not necessarily show up within those culling reasons and might ultimately lead to other problems within the sow that don't get called that in general. Likewise, euthanasia is often required for animals that do end up lame, so they don't incorporate into this 20.3% that we're looking at here. Selection for optimal feet and leg conformation traits improves sow longevity. That's really what we're trying to get at, is longevity in the sows. Visual appraisal methods that rely on trained individuals to score an animal have been previously developed, which we'll go into. But there are multiple systems that are similar, but they are different. So one of the objectives that we were trying to do with this overall study was make a system where everybody could use it regardless of training level, that doesn't necessarily take into account the vulnerability to varying degrees of bias and error that are associated with scores. We're not saying that those scoring systems that have been developed are bad, as my major professor has been involved in some of those processes, but that based on the availability of training and interaction between scores, they can have varying degrees of error. As shown here, a score between 2 and 3 of this structural scoring guide, it kind of takes experience to differentiate between the two individual scores. So moving on to the introduction for the actual point of this talk, is that final selection of breeding females occurs at roughly 20 weeks of age, or at 140 days. During this time frame, the individuals are still undergoing rapid growth. Likewise, life events such as gestation, which can add significant weight, have not been able to be evaluated for potential effects on structure. This is selection. So female replacements do not reach their mature physical size until after their second parity. And like we saw previously in those removals and culls, 20.3% of the animals get removed before this time frame anyways. Likewise, culling, it's been shown from an economical point of view that these animals normally don't pay for themselves until after their third parity as well. So we're losing a lot of opportunity, especially in genetic improvement as well, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to look at it. Few studies have examined structural change over time in swine. Fernandez de Sevilla observed 6 feet and leg conformation traits between time of selection and second parity. What they noticed was that sickle-hocked rear legs became more prevalent with age, and that pasterns became straighter between selection and first parity. However, no studies were found to examine structural change during gestation. So the objectives of this particular study were to evaluate feet and leg joint angle measurements between time of selection and after their first parity. And then secondly, to evaluate feet and leg angle measurements across gestation days. So in order to achieve that, we had 319 maternal gilts at selection with an age range of 19 to 25 weeks, so within that selection time frame. And then 277 remained post-first parity, with gestation days ranging from 0 to 87 days. And what I'd like to point here is that 42 animals were removed, but of those 42 animals, only 8 had a code reason of feet and leg issues. So a relatively minor loss in animals. However, it's even more drastically reduced whenever you consider that only 8 of those animals were removed due to feet and leg problems, or that's how they were coded. So for the animals by analysis, parity 0 to parity 1, females with repeated records from selection and post-first parity were used. So of those animals that I'd mentioned previously, 126 total females were in that time frame. Of only females in their first 21 days of gestation, post-first parity were included. And I'd moved it down to 21 days of gestation to remove any weight effects that might be due to the gestation process. So we're looking at open females between 0 and first parity. For parity 2 farm and gestation age, all of the remaining females post-first parity were used in that analysis. So ImageJ software was used to take feet and leg measurements from the images, and then the phenotypic traits or angles are measured in degrees. And here's where I'll talk to you a little bit about the objective evaluation process that we use. So I hope everybody can see this picture all right, and I know it's a bad representation of the actual picture. But initially we started with taking still images using pictures, and from that was very labor intensive. So if you're thinking, how can this relate back to a farm situation? Benny can attest, I think we got through about 20 animals in an 8-hour time period when we were taking still pictures. When you're wanting to get a lot of animals in a short amount of time, that doesn't necessarily work out the best. So, especially when these animals acted like New York runway models, they were divas and didn't like to cooperate. So what we went to instead was a video capture process where we use video cameras. And those video cameras, as you were able to move the sow across and back. And in that time frame, you would get still images, or I could extract still images from those videos where I could then analyze them later. And that allowed us to take more around 150 animals per day instead of the 20 that we got previously. But what you'll notice is these are the angles that I took. So the knee measurement is represented between values A and B, and that's the average of those two angles in between. Originally, I tried to take a central angle from that, but unfortunately the repeatability of one measurement between those didn't work out, as well as the two measurements averaged together. Likewise, C and D represents the front pastern, and that's in reference to the floor, or a straight slatted edge that we have in all the images that we'd collected. E and F correspond to the hawk, and then G and H correspond to the rear pastern, similar to the front pastern. From a rear stance diagram that we've got here, A and B represents rear stance. So as you can see, these two values are also averaged to make one angle. And on opposite sides of 90 degrees that you would see, it represents an animal that would be standing in or standing out. So for the parity 0 to parity 1 analysis, proc mix from SAS software was used with fixed effects of parity inside a measurement. So we took left and right side images of these animals. ID was used as a random effect. Parity is a repeated variable, and then the results are displayed as LS means plus or minus standard error. Parity 2 farm and gestation age analysis. Proc mix from SAS software was used again with fixed effects of farm inside a measurement with a linear covariate of gestation age. ID again was used as a random effect, and the results are displayed as LS means for the fixed effects and then a regression coefficient for the linear covariate. There's a lot of numbers up here. I will highlight the more important numbers that we've found. So we found, and we'll talk about this more in the discussion as well, but there was a significant effect between parity for the knee of roughly 0.8 degrees or 0.8 of a degree. The largest difference that was found was in the rear pastern and the hawk, with 5 degrees separation between the rear pastern and then almost 6 degrees between the hawk. And then for the rear stance, I'll talk about that briefly here in just a second too, but that could be explained by some farm effects that weren't included in this model. The only difference inside, as shown here, is roughly 2 degrees between the left and the right in the hawk. So farm and gestation differences during second gestation. As you'll see, there are some significant differences here and here. The major difference that I want to touch upon right here is that farm difference that we see here of roughly 6 degrees between B and C and A could be some of the corresponding difference between that rear stance in between parity 0 and 1. And likewise, we see an opposite directional effect for gestation age in the knee and front pasterns. So those angles seem to work against each other as gestation age increases. And then also hawk gets relatively larger as gestation age increases as well. For discussion, rear pastern angles decreased or weakened, as we say, and hawk angles increased between selection and first parity. So again, those angles work in opposite directions of one another, so they almost compensated to the same degrees between 0 and parity 1. And then rear stance also decreased, but that again may be due mostly to a farm difference in that second analysis. And side was only significant for the hawk, however those differences are small. So a lot of times what we talk about in this is that those biological differences may not actually be, or the statistical differences may not be biologically important. But degree differences of roughly 5 and 6 degrees are fairly large. Farm differences were found in the knee, front and rear pasterns, and to the highest degree in the rear stance. Side was significant for the knee and front and rear pasterns. Angle differences are small and are most likely not biologically important. And gestation age showed significance in the knee, front pastern, and hawk angles. Knee angle values decreased over gestation age, and then front pastern angles increased over gestation days. So in conclusion, as age increases, the structure changes, with rear legs showing greater variation than the front leg. Front leg differences across age are generally small, and results suggest that environmental factors such as farm can contribute to angle differences. And that's part of the small angle changes over time are kind of what we're looking for. So that magic bullet that we're looking for of this is the most important value or this is the most important joint that we're looking at. I think small angle changes over time are possibly the most important. However, we'll have to look at that later on. But I say that because with less variation across time, if we take that at selection, we know what it's going to be over time as well. Rear leg structure still requires further investigation. I think a lot of what we can look at in that rear leg structure is, are those changes, do those changes carry over time and time again in opposite directions as we saw in those results. And then one of the things that I liked from that paper by Fernandez de Sevilla, he stated that the detection of genetic components in leg conformation and specific leg defects in sows should prompt further research into the genetic architecture of morphological traits in sows. I think that's highly important considering that my results directly contradict the results that he got in those papers. Ongoing and future work, so some of the questions that we had towards the end of it was that we wanted to look at gestation structural change in more detail. So we wanted to look at individual structural change within gestation days. And then likewise, evaluation within an individual. We're also doing another study where evaluation within an individual will carry over for 3 whole parities or until the conclusion of that study. And it'll include all pedigree information for some genetic analysis that I can do as well.